Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by Managing Partner Evan Green and US Practice Director Tim Golden. Please feel free to ask any questions through the pop-up text bar on your screen, and we'll do our best to address the questions at the end of the webinar. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them through the information provided on screen now. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to our panelists.
Thanks, Stephen. Well, welcome to the July 30th version. So we are 15 months into the pandemic, and we finally are starting to see in Canada a light at the end of the tunnel. And we're going to talk about what's going on now in Canada, in particularly with relationship to the pandemic and how things are changing. And there have been changes. So first and foremost, in terms of the change, is, the government, with great fanfare, as only the government can do, announced that effective July 5th, there will be a change to quarantine requirements for entering Canada. Now, the first thing I'd like to say about it is great, fantastic. It's the first change, real change of substance that we've seen since we started getting these wonderful implementations and border closures. So from that perspective, it's great. Here's the first real problem I had with it. During the press conference and the announcement, they just kept saying July 5th, July 5th, July 5th, July 5th. And then they came out with the web announcement about it. It's not July 5th, it's July 6th. It's 11:59 p.m. On July 5th. So if anybody listening is coming in during the day on July 5th or anytime up to 11:59, they're under the old rules, not the new rules. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Number two is, let's talk about what the changes are. So firstly, there's no changes with respect to the testing requirement. Everyone that is required to test within 72 hours of arrival in Canada still has to test within 72 hours of arrival in Canada. And in addition, they will also be tested at the border, whether that be at the airport or the land border upon arrival. Now, where it changed was quarantine, and it's just a quarantine change. So if you can show that you have been fully vaxxed, and that has a definition. Fully vaxxed for our purposes means that you have taken one of the 4 approved vaccines for Canada. So AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna, and however many vaccines you need to take, you've taken both, or the Johnson & Johnson single one, and 14 days has elapsed since that last shot. You upload proof of your vaccination status into the ArriveCan app. You have to do that before you arrive. I would also recommend that you bring the receipts with you, and when you come through, they will advise you that you do not need to quarantine. Now, you still need a quarantine plan, because in case that test comes back positive, you have to be able to quarantine. But at that point, once you're through immigration, you are free from quarantine. So the quarantine hotel goes away and the requirement to quarantine goes away. So let's take it further. What if you haven't fully vaxxed? Well, the old rules still apply. So if you're flying in, quarantine hotel and 14 days of quarantine. For kids who can't vaccinate or haven't vaccinated, they are still required to quarantine. They are not required to do the hotel stay. So we're expecting the airport to be pretty busy on July 6th. And I'm hearing anecdotally that they put on some more flights because nobody's traveling this week. It doesn't make any sense. The other part to that is, what happens if I arrived on July 4th and I'm quarantining? Do I get released from quarantine on July 6th? The answer is no. As far as we know, there is nothing to say that this is in any way retroactive. So at this point, don't enter till July 6th if you want to be exempt from quarantine. So that was a big announcement. It doesn't affect anything else other than quarantine, and that's key to understand. So it doesn't open up discretionary travel. It doesn't open up business travel. None of the entry requirements have changed. In addition, if you get an exemption, like you're eligible for this if you're eligible to enter Canada. So if we take the example of I'm an American citizen, married to a Canadian citizen, we're both in New York City, I want to come into Canada. Well, a spouse of a Canadian citizen is eligible to come into Canada. But in order to be eligible, that spouse has to intend to stay for 15 days. So if you're not intending to stay for 15 days, you're not eligible to come into Canada and you won't get any of these benefits. So those rules haven't changed. The only thing that's changed is quarantining, okay? Having said that, because you're not in quarantine anymore, you will be able to fly when you leave the country. Under the current rules, if you're under a quarantine order, you have to drive across the border, but you wouldn't have to do that if you're not under quarantine. Tim, over to you to talk about some of the US stuff and what's going on.
Yeah, so it's immediately relevant. Thanks so much to everybody for joining. But what Evan's talking about really has an immediate impact on the consulates here in Canada, the consular posts. And I think that's the immediate reflection that we can sort of take is March 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, right up to August, they were completely shut down. Nothing was happening. It was all sort of just a hope for an emergency appointment, but really no scheduling. And then they really sort of opened up as Ontario had opened up, as Canada had opened up for a brief period. They really started, or they showed that they really had sort of the infrastructure in place to get back to business. And that was unfortunately very about a 60 to 90, or excuse me, about a 60-day window where they were scheduling. And then Ontario had to shut down, Canada had to shut down for that wave in the fall, and it's really been sort of moribund since then. But now what we have seen, and obviously, as I mentioned, it's all determined. There's a little bit of feedback coming in. It's all been determined by how the local government are dictating what the local sort of requirements are. Because of those tough restrictions in Canada, the consulate has to adhere to those tough restrictions. So the welcome news is, as it looks like Canada is moving towards a better place with lifting these restrictions, now we've started to see dates not necessarily open up immediately, but closer to. So just sort of the standard that continues at the consulates is it's emergency only. You can book applications very far in advance into even 2022. But those are then either a request for an emergency appointment is put through and then they can push it up. The positive is that those dates are getting a little bit closer. They're not in 2022 so much. Now we're starting to see dates open up in September and October. There really is some feedback on everybody here. Anyway, the point being that as these appointments open up, we're positive, but at the same time, we really have to reflect on this, which is that right now, there are so many appointments being requested for emergencies. And really we're in a tough position right now, positive because things are starting to open up. We're starting to see appointments come through. I would say specifically also through the E2 unit or the E unit, that those appointments are starting to open up, and also that they are ready to start scheduling, because the E2 does have a little bit of a difference. You will wait for their go-ahead to schedule, and they're starting to open those up. And E2 has been really sort of locked down for a long time throughout this, and it's just great to sort of see those green shoots, but to realize the fact that emergency appointments, everybody has an emergency right now, so that they're really backed up. I think for the short term, maybe the next month or two, but we're hopeful that things will start to open up the consulates. And then that sort of brings us into number 3, which is also based not just at the consulates, but majority are these applications, which are for national interest exemption waivers, which I'm sure some people on the call are very familiar with. Individuals who are coming from those areas that were that received a travel ban from the US, meaning Schengen area, Brazil, South Africa, India recently added, Iran, and China. Those areas, anybody who's traveling to the United States currently cannot enter the United States if they've been in those areas within the last 14 days, unless they can receive a national interest exemption waiver either through a consulate or somebody with a visa that allows them to enter into the United States, a non-immigrant visa. Green card holders, US citizens are not subject to this bar. But if they're approaching the border and they are subject to that 14-day bar because they're coming from one of those areas, you can submit an in-person a national interest exemption waiver. The most recent development there is that Customs and Border Protection are really not entertaining those anymore. They are only entertaining those for the most extreme life or death circumstances. Instead, Customs and Border Protection really has pushed it back to the consulates, and for those individuals who are attempting to enter, must visit their local consulate to get these NIEs. Now, that sounds like not much of a development, but at the same time, similar to sort of the slow open of the consulates, emergency appointments, or everything everybody wants right now. Same thing with the NIE. Yes, Customs and Border Protection has really removed themselves, but we are hopeful that this is something that we're starting to see, as Evan says, the end of the tunnel, that the NIE processing is going to start to hopefully be lifted. The difficult part is that that's really regional. That's determined, particularly coming out of the Schengen area, on a country-to-country, real bilateral basis with the U.S. And probably you've seen the headlines, sort of UK, U.S. starting to sort of negotiate certain potential restrictions. But that is the thing to sort of look for, is the individual countries getting up to speed. I think Europe, their vaccine rollout has been doing pretty well within the last month or two, so they are getting their numbers up. But again, large areas such as Schengen, where there are individual countries, that's going to take some time to unwind. Other countries such as India and Brazil, who are really still in the thick of things, that's going to likely take some time. So it's going to be really sort of country by country, and determined obviously by the raging pandemic or levels of pandemic in each country.
Yeah. No, I think the thing, Tim, there to understand is, just because somebody comes from the UK, and we're working on a case right now, Tim and I, on this. He's arriving from the UK, so he's going to come after July 5th, so on the 6th. He won't be subject, he's fully vaxxed, so he won't be subject to quarantining in Canada, but he is subject to 14 days. He is not allowed to enter the United States. So notwithstanding the fact that you're coming from Canada, if you have been in one of those countries in the last 14 days, you are not allowed to enter the United States without the NIE. So
Correct.
That's the scenario.
Applicable even to layovers. If you touch down in any of those countries, you're going to be subject to the 14-day bar. So that's really something that you have to keep, obviously, at the front of your mind, but we're hopeful that's going to be unwound slowly with each individual country.
So taking the next two titles, essential and non-essential travel to Canada, and what's changed? Absolutely nothing has changed. Now, we are very hopeful that now that we've seen the July 5th, 6th announcement, that things may change on the 21st. So the way all these things get rolled out in Canada is through an order in council, which is basically a small section of the cabinet provides the legislation upon which all these things are based upon. And they're on 30-day rollouts. The 21st of each month is what they get rolled to. So that's why when you see, like, what's the 21st? That was the first day it was implemented, and it was on a 30-day basis. So right now, the current orders that are in place expire on the 21st of July. So if things are to change a couple days before, a week before, stay tuned. But with the numbers as they are, it's looking good, I think. But having said that, the one thing I would say to everybody, and is get vaxxed, because it ain't going to open to people who aren't vaxxed right now. They're all still going to probably be subject to the rules and regulations. But hopefully, on the 21st, if you're fully vaxxed, you will be eligible for discretionary entry to Canada. As of right now, no changes whatsoever. We get the call, but I'm fully vaxxed. No, that just has to do with quarantining, period. Tim, over to you on USCIS processing.
So the processing, which is initially really positive as the new administration came in, they introduced a lot of things that sort of started to get things moving. One was a biometrics, trying their best to sort of use biometrics from previous applications, and really kind of just sort of doing some of the fixes that really have been dragging down a lot of the applications as we came into this new administration. That surge, I think, has really sort of recessed somewhat. I would say that premium processing is still fine. That's a $2,500 fee that you can expedite a case. There's nothing that's been affected there, so it's always an option. But I would say the longer term applications, and particularly employment authorization cards that come for dependent spouses who may apply, or relevant and connected to a green card application. Those travel documents and work authorization for interim work authorization and travel documentation while a green card is pending have really slowed down. AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, is really pushing USCIS to demand that these applications get processed. But that is, I think, some of the reaction to a lot of the cases that they were able to push through. Now, those unfortunately, those processes have sort of slowed down somewhat. And that's a balance of both personnel as well as, sort of unwinding some of the more difficult applications and restrictions that the previous administration had put on it. So again, positive. I think we are seeing the green shoots. We are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But right now, it is difficult as we start to continue to process through USCIS, which again is operationally the administration operates with the union.
Okay. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is permanent residence in Canada and what's going on. So over the course of the pandemic, there have been dramatic changes in permanent residence processing in Canada. Primarily, everything is now focused on individuals who are already in Canada. When you apply for permanent residence to Canada, it's primarily done on a points-based system under the express entry. And there's two ways to qualify. Either on Canada Experience class on one hand, and those are individuals who have at least 1 year experience in Canada, and federal skilled workers, and those are individuals who don't necessarily have that year of experience in Canada, but score enough under the point system to be selected. So in the point system, you're scored on your age, education, language ability in English or French, and work experience in and out of Canada. There are bonus points available within the system for those people who have LMIAs, family members in Canada, permanent job offers in Canada, educated in Canada. They get bonus points. Over the course of the pandemic, the government, although there have been some federal skilled worker draws, not very many. I would say probably 90% of all draws have occurred within the Canada Experience class. So individuals have to have at least 1 year of Canadian experience to qualify. And what's happened is the numbers have dropped dramatically. Previously, prior to the pandemic, we would be in the 450 to 470 points, somewhere even higher than that, in order to get that invitation to apply. What's happened under the pandemic is the points have dropped and continue to drop. And the last draw was 360 points. So if you look at it sort of at raw data, the criteria that you need has dropped by 25% over the course of the pandemic and continues to drop. We're seeing like a 10-point drop week in and week out. Draws typically occur every couple of weeks. And what's happened in the basis of all of this is the government hasn't met their numbers. They try to get, I think our current goal is about 405,000 per year of immigrants in all categories. What's happened is last year in particular, they did not meet anywhere near the numbers that they needed to, and they recognized this year that it was going to be a problem for those individuals who were not in Canada. So what they did was scooted it over and dropped the number so that more people would be selected. So there's been a big push on for that. It's interesting, I was looking, CBC had an article this morning, which was completely inaccurate. It was about a guy who was complaining that his CEC application was taking too long, it was about 18 months, and he said he had to stop work because of it, which didn't make any sense to me because you get a work permit out of this process as once your application is perfected. You can get the bridging open work permit. So the article was not a correct article on CBC, so bad on them for that. Under the Pathways, which was a special program which was introduced earlier this year, once again, because of the numbers and increasing those numbers, there isn't a bridge available. So I don't really know what they were talking about there. But our advice to everybody is, if you're in Canada and have at least a year of experience, throw your application in, because we don't know how low those numbers are going to get. The other thing that we're seeing in the permanent residence process is in Ontario, because the numbers have come down so much, the PNP application, which is the provincial nominee program, has changed how they do things. And the way it used to work was that the employer would submit an application on behalf of an applicant, and once the employer had been approved, then the applicant provided their details. They flipped it now, and what happens now is that the employee themselves files an expression of interest within the program. If they're selected, they say, great, you've been selected. Now we need all the details from your employer. So we're getting a lot of questions from employers saying, well, I didn't want to do this. I don't want to sponsor the individual. Well, do I have to do this? The answer is no, you don't. It's just the structure of the program now has changed. People within the PNP, I tell you to reach out, because there may be opportunities there. Each province is different. Sometimes you definitely need your employer. Sometimes your employer just needs to fill the application and doesn't need to provide much else. But typically we'll see that where people have trouble in the language testing, they want to use the PNP for that. But overall, the real push is for people who are in Canada, and those who have at least a year of Canadian work experience. We would advise you to get your applications in, and because you never know what's going to happen there. So I think that's pretty much it. Tim, do you see questions? Because I'm not seeing some come up in my system.
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. All right. Stephen, I'm going to flip it back to you, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Evan. So that's all the time we have for today, folks. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a special thanks to Evan and Tim for sharing their expert knowledge. If you'd like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out to book a consultation, and details can be found on screen now. I'd encourage you all to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media to stay up to date on the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.
Yeah, happy Canada Day and happy 4th of July.
Great to see everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for joining.